Harry, why the cockerel? Why was he chosen as the Pathé trademark?
Well, there was a rumour that when Pathé opened their first building in Wardour Street in 1910, a cockerel flew onto the roof, and they adopted it from that particular situation.
A likely story.
It was. Really, I think it is because it's the emblem of France, and Charles Pathe, the originator of the Pathé organisation, adopted it as his trademark.
Well, he's a very fine fowl, better than the budgie guy anyway. So he started here in 1910. What were the early newsreels like?
Well, they were rather flat newsreels. They were very short, run for about 4 minutes, and they were issued bi-weekly, twice a week. And they would contain a static shot, maybe, of horses running past the camera, and what they call that the Newbury Cup. There was a story of Lord Lonsdale presenting a costermonger's cart to an old coster.
That's pretty sensational, isn't it?
Yes, and of course one of the first demonstrations by women in business where they held a strike in Camden Town against the management.
Now, you mentioned the static camera. This meant that you just plonked the camera down and you couldn't move it either way.
You couldn't track it either way, no. Things like horse racing, you set your camera into interval positions along the course and the horses flash by, and then you cut to another shot and it would probably be near the post and the race would be over. There was no such thing as a tracking camera in those days.
Although the camera was so static and therefore very limited in what it could cover, Pathé did still manage to grab the odd extraordinary incident, didn't they?
Yes, there was the famous derby, of course, where the suffragette woman, Emily Davidson, ran from the crowd, threw herself under the king's horse and was killed, which is a way of showing the suffragette cause and the reasons for why it existed.
A year or so after that suffragette incident at Epsom, of course, the First World War broke out. How did Pathé set about covering that?
Well, they called the newsreel the Pathé's Animated Gazette, which is a rather unusual title, but it was thought to be in sort of a competition with the newspapers. The first time they'd ever had such a competition. Of course, people, when they knew that World War I films were being shown in the cinemas, of course, would rather go to the cinema than buy the newspapers.
How many cameramen would you have out there in the early years of the war?
Well, there was probably only about one, and he was associated with the War Office. His name was Frank Basil, and whatever he shot there was, of course, brought back to the War Office, who censored the material and then issued it out to the newsreels.
So the public only saw it, what, days or even weeks later?
Probably weeks later, yes.
Now, presumably the First World War established the newsreels as a major and very popular news-giving source. How did they develop in the next few years after say, 1918?
Well, after the war, they, of course, became longer newsreels, and they were much more comprehensive, and they travelled farther into the world, and they were bringing back stories. Sporting events were being covered, and particularly there was one occasion where they went to Wembley for the first cup final in 1923, where it was considered that one other company had the exclusive rights to shoot there. And Pathé didn't abide by this, and they sent a cameraman along who had his camera hidden away in a large hammer, and he had a false beard and glasses on his face so he wouldn't be identified, and went there as a supporter of West Ham, who of course one of the teams competing in that cup final. And there are pictures of him actually disrobing, as you might say, and exposing the camera to the public.
Harry, over the years you must have accumulated a fantastic amount of film. Have you any idea how much there is?
Well, we've kept all the film that was ever released by the Pathé organisation in this country anyway, and it's estimated that we have probably 50 million feet
50
of
million?
35mm film.
That's fantastic, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, you've got these 50 million feet of film, but if I asked you to find me a bit, I hired a bit, as it were, for programs, say, like this, how do you set about finding it? I mean, let me give you a challenge. Let's take the Hindenburg disaster, the airship disaster in 1937, I think it was. How soon could you put your hands on that?
Well, we have to catalogue all this material and cross-index it, and we put it in these fireproof drawers, and we open the drawer at the particular headed references, which are on the front there, And we pull out the necessary gear, and we run down through the main headed cards, air displays, SU rescue.
Fly pasts, helicopters there, hovercraft, record flights, parachutes. Must be getting closer.
Yes, here we are.
And there we are. Abracadabra. General view of ballast being released, giving the impression that something is wrong. And indeed it was, badly. Well, where do you go from there, then, once you've found the card?
Well, of course, this card conveys the location number of the vault that it's in. And, of course, if we go like to adjourn to the vault, we will find the film and then put it on the machine and show it to you.
How did Pathé get the Hindenburg story?
Well, this is probably a normal routine camera assignment by the Pathé News Company of America to cover this airship arriving at Lakenheath in America. And it was nothing unusual expected until the ballast started being thrown out. And they obviously realised there was something seriously wrong. And they carried on covering it, shooting it, and eventually, of course, the airship burst into flames.
And it turned out to be one of the most historic bits of film of all time, I suppose,
I would think
didn't
so,
it?
yeah, quite definitely. Yes.
Let's have a look at it.
There goes more ballast, but the tale is settling in spite of all that has been dumped. A grim note of impending tragedy. Finally, the landing lines are dropped. These scenes were filmed by Pathé News cameraman William Deek, and you are about to see the pictures he got when the ship exploded. Those aboard leaping for life from a flaming inferno. The actual crash of the Hindenburg. An airship destroyed in less than half a minute.
This is a Now It Can Be Told story. 4:25 in the Mediterranean on the afternoon of November the 25th, 1941. A salvo of torpedoes fired at close range struck HMS Barham. The stricken battleship heeled over to port. Within 4 minutes of being hit, her after magazine blew up. She sank with a loss of 859 lives.
At what stage in the convoy did the tragedy of the Barham happen?
It was the following day. I used to sit up on the upper deck most of the time when I was at sea, and I usually went as high as I could for two reasons, one for protection and one for you could see more. So I used to sit up on the Admiral's Bridge in the battleship, and I was sitting up there all day long. Because you had to be around, as you appreciate, the incidents at sea always happen so quickly that if you weren't there, you didn't get them. At about 4:30ish, I was a bit thirsty, so I thought I'd go down for a cup of tea. And I'd just got off the bridge, and about 2 flights down, ladders, and I heard a terrific bang. And I looked round, the ship went hard to port, and I could just see the Barham ahead of us. We were steaming in line ahead.
How far away was she, roughly?
Quite close, actually. A few cables, I think they call them. Anyway, it's quite close. And we had to turn very sharply to avoid hitting her, because she just stopped dead. I just saw at that particular moment the spouts which the torpedoes throw up when they hit anything. I'd seen them before in other operations. so I knew what had happened. But,
how many were there?
There were 4, in fact. It hit her in the engine room. And she listed rather badly straight away, as you saw in the film just now. And so I thought, well, I sort of rushed up as fast as I could back to my camera and started to film. I took a shot and I thought, well, I wonder what she's going to do. You know, we used to use cameras at that time which were only ran 200 feet, which is about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So we had to use this sort of camera at sea because there were clockwork and we didn't have to worry about batteries and things, that sort of thing. So I thought, well, shall I change the film or not? And I thought, well, I think I'd better take another shot. She was listing rather badly. And I started to film and I saw she started to turn over. And I got a bit worried about my film. And I thought again, I think I'd better change the film because she'd probably turn turtle. And as I was sort of trying to make up my mind what to do, it blew up, as you saw.
Terrifying explosion.
Yeah, terrifying. So in an occasion like that, one's mind sort of goes pretty well blank anyway, and all one's thinking of is the picture, actually, which one shouldn't do, of course, but, it was only afterwards one realised what really had happened.
Do you rate that your most vivid experience as a cameraman?
War experience, yes. Mm-hmm.
You've had a good deal to do with royalty in your career too, haven't you?
Yes, I have, yes.
When did that begin and where?
Well, it began as in an official capacity, attached to the royal family, about 1952, just before the Queen became Queen.
Did you cover any tours with them?
Yes, I went around Canada with her when she was Princess Elizabeth. And then when she became Queen, I went round the world with her in the Gothic, and was at the coronation and that sort of...
Now, the 1953 coronation was rather special for newsreels because it was the first one they'd ever covered in colour, wasn't it? On that kind of occasion, were you just plonked in one spot and told to shoot away, or did you rove about and see what you could find?
On that particular one, I did rove around, in fact. Usually, it depends if one is on a thing of that event, it's so coordinated that everybody's got one specific job to do. I mean, you're in one of a large team, as you know.
John, thank you very much.
God, the crown of the faithful, bless, we beseech thee, this crown, and so sanctify thy servant Elizabeth, upon whose head this day thou dost place it for a sign of royal majesty.
Television, of course, became the arch enemy for the newsreels, didn't it? More about that in a second. But in the early days, when television was just sort of being invented, I imagine that newsreels just saw it as another scientific crackpot thing on the horizon.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, say, John Logie Baird was tinkering around with an old sort of ex-wireless sort of thing in Charing Cross Road, I believe it was, and Pathé went down there and shot him at work, and never realising, of course, that sooner or later it was going to kill Pathé newsreels or any other newsreel.
When, in fact, did Pathé fold up as a newsreel operation?
Pathé folded up as a newsreel in 1970.
What was it about the competition from television that newsreels couldn't cope with?
Well, it was, I think, basically the speed of it all. You see, the fact is that although we could cut and edit a newsreel in much the same time as television do, it was a question of making 200 or 300 prints to get them out in all parts of the country.
Yeah.
And this was made it 2 or 3 days late, whereas by the time it reached the cinemas, of course, it was history.
Although, ironically enough, there's at least one instance where the newsreels managed to cover an event and get it on the screens the same night, at least in London. I'm thinking of Churchill's funeral.
Yeah, that was so. I mean, so there was a lot of pre-planning done. There was certain setups in certain positions en route to St Paul's. Dispatch riders were commissioned, and the film was brought back to Technicolor. Technicolor were all ready to develop it, and it was back in London, cut, edited by the afternoon.
But that obviously would have been too expensive a business to do every week, on every story, wouldn't it?
You couldn't do it every week, no.
Well, Harry, let's have a look at part of that moving day as seen through Pathé cameras, and thank you very much for talking to us.
For 2 crucial periods in modern history, Winston Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty. It is doubly appropriate that on his last passage through the capital, men of the Royal Navy should draw the gun carriage. A generation ago, the whole fleet warmed to the signal, Winston is back. In all this moving observance, Britain marks her respect, admiration, and above all, her affection for her greatest son. Orders and decorations are borne in the slow procession. Nelson, Wellington, and a small host of warriors were honored in St. Paul's in the past. Today, the state funeral service will laud the memory of the old warrior, one who held sway over the forces of land, sea, and air.